Lucy froze in the doorway of the nursery, her breath catching like a snagged thread in the heavy air. The cradle loomed before her, a skeletal relic swathed in dust, its empty hollow a void that echoed the one inside her chest. She hadn't come here for this, not for the way the faded blue wallpaper peeled like old skin, revealing the rot beneath, or how the faint scent of talcum powder lingered, a ghost of tenderness long extinguished. Her fingers tightened around the camera strap, knuckles whitening as if holding on could keep the memories at bay. Inside her mind, the walls crumbled. Why this house? Why now? The question looped like a broken record, but she knew the answer in the marrow of her bones. It was her sister's face she saw in every shadowed corner, those wide eyes that laugh cut short by screeching tires and rain-slicked roads. Lucy had been driving that night too fast, too distracted by an argument that meant nothing now. The guilt had hollowed her out, leaving a shell that chased hauntings to feel alive, or at least to feel something beyond the numbness that wrapped her like fog. She sank to her knees, not crying. Tears had dried up years ago, but her body betrayed her with a tremor, a silent quake that rippled through her limbs. The camera slipped from Lucy's grasp, clattering softly on the warped floorboards, the sound swallowed by the house's oppressive quiet. She didn't move to retrieve it. Instead, her eyes locked on Asher's, those amber pools reflecting the dim twilight filtering through grimy panes. He didn't growl or shift, merely stared, his muzzle twitching as if scenting something beyond the dust and decay. A low creak echoed from downstairs like bones settling in an old grave, and Lucy's pulse quickened, a faint alarm bell in the fog of her grief. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, ascended the stairs. Asher's ears perked, his gaze flicking to the doorway, a subtle tension coiling in his frame. Lucy whispered, "Who's there?" But the words dissolved into the air, unanswered. A shadow stretched across the threshold, resolving into a man in uniform. Officer Dean, his badge glinting like a cold star face, etched with skepticism, and something deeper, a flicker of recognition that made his jaw tighten. "This place is off limits," he said, voice rough as gravel, but his eyes darted to Asher, then the cradle hesitation blooming in his stance. In that moment, as Dean's hand hovered near his holster and Asher's tail gave the slightest involuntary wag, Lucy felt the air shift, a promise woven in the gloom that this encounter would unearth secrets buried deeper than bones. The nursery's chill seeped into Lucy's bones, but it was the cradle's empty sway, ghostly as if rocked by an invisible hand, that yanked her back through the years. She closed her eyes, and there it was, the sun-dappled backyard of her childhood home, where she and her sister Mia had built forts from blankets and branches. Mia, 5 years younger, with freckles like scattered stars and a laugh that bubbled like a brook, had trailed Lucy everywhere, calling her Lulu in that lisping voice. They were inseparable, two halves of a whole, until that rain-lashed night when Lucy, at 21, insisted on driving home from the movies despite the storm. "Just a quick trip," she'd said, ignoring Mia's pleas to wait. The car hydroplaned on a slick curve, slamming into a guardrail with a screech of metal and shattering glass. Mia's side took the brunt, her small body crumpled like paper, gone before the sirens wailed. Guilt had been Lucy's shadow ever since, a relentless whisper that eroded her days. She dropped out of college, where she'd been studying journalism, and drifted into odd jobs, waitressing, temping, anything to numb the ache. But the void grew, swallowing friendships and dreams, until one sleepless night she stumbled upon a paranormal forum. The stories of ghosts and lost souls resonated, a mirror to her own haunting. She started her blog, Whispers from the Veil, chasing abandoned places with her camera, seeking proof that something lingered after death. Each post was a plea. If spirits exist, maybe Mia's out there forgiving me. Yet success only deepened the isolation. Followers praised her bravery, unaware that every investigation was a penance, a desperate grasp at redemption. Back in her cramped apartment on the city's edge, Lucy's life unfolded in a monotonous haze, a deliberate armor against the sharp edges of memory. The place was a study in barrenness. White walls, unmarked by photos, a single bed with rumpled sheets, and a kitchen counter cluttered with takeout containers and half-empty mugs of cold coffee. Mornings blurred into afternoons as she scrolled through tip lines and forums, her laptop screen the only light piercing the drawn curtains. She avoided mirrors, hating the hollow-eyed stranger staring back a woman who'd forgotten how to smile without it cracking like brittle ice. Her routine was a fortress of numbness. Wake at noon, brew coffee. She barely tasted edit footage from the last haunt until her eyes burned. Social media notifications pinged like distant echoes, likes, comments, subscribers climbing toward 10,000. But they meant nothing. Each video was a ritual, a way to externalize the grief without letting it consume her. Evenings dissolved into research, poring over maps of forgotten towns, chasing whispers of tragedies that mirrored her own. Friends had drifted away, weary of her silences, and dates ended in awkward goodbyes when she flinched at mentions of family. "I'm fine," she'd lie to herself, curling up with a blanket that still faintly smelled of Mia's shampoo preserved like a relic. Asher lay curled beside the cradle, his once glossy coat now a patchwork of dull gray and scars that twisted like rivers on a map of suffering. His ribs protruded like the ribs of an old shipwreck, each breath a shallow rasp that stirred the dust motes dancing in the slanted light. The German shepherd's eyes, deep amber pools rimmed with sorrow, fixed on the empty cradle as if it were the last anchor in a stormy sea. He hadn't always been this way. Flashes of memory flickered in his mind like faded film reels, a warm hearth in a bustling home, tiny hands tugging at his ears with giggles, a baby's coo that made his tail thump against the floor. He had been the guardian, the shadow that followed the child everywhere, his loyalty forged in the simple joy of a family that once was whole. The nursery held its breath as Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor, a respectful distance from Asher, her back against the wall that peeled like forgotten promises. She didn't reach out, didn't coo or coax. Instead, she let the silence weave between them, thick as the dust blanketing the room. Asher's eyes flicked to her occasionally, not with fear, but with a recognition that prickled like static, two souls adrift in the same storm-tossed sea, their wounds invisible, yet palpable. Her guilt over Mia was a mirror to his abandonment, both carrying the weight of what they couldn't protect, their hearts hollowed out like the cradle that loomed between them. The sky cracked open like a fractured skull, unleashing a torrent that hammered the house's sagging roof with relentless fury. Lucy jolted upright in the nursery, her heart pounding as thunder rolled through the walls, vibrating the cradle's spindles like chattering teeth. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, blurring the world outside into a gray abyss, while inside the air grew thick with the scent of wet wood and mildew rising from the floorboards. Asher, who had been a statue of quiet vigil, now paced in tight circles beside the cradle, his fur slick and matted ears pinned back against the cacophony. His eyes, wide and wild, darted to the leaking ceiling where water dripped in rhythmic plinks, pooling around his paws like tears from the heavens. Lucy's hand hovered inches from Asher's trembling flank, the storm's roar drowning out her ragged breaths. "What am I doing?" Her mind screamed, a whirlwind of doubt swirling like the wind outside. She wasn't a savior. Her track record was etched in loss. Mia gone because of her recklessness, her blog a hollow echo of failed redemptions. Caring meant opening the floodgates to more pain, to attachments that could shatter like the glass littering the floor. Dean loomed in the doorway, rain dripping from his cap, his face a mask of practicality. "Leave the mutt, it's a stray, probably rabid. We've got our own skins to save." His words were logic incarnate, a shield against the emotional torrent, but they clashed with the pull in Lucy's gut. Lightning etched the nursery in stark relief, illuminating Asher's drenched form as he huddled against the cradle, his growl lost in the thunder's roar. Lucy's hesitation shattered like the storm-tossed branches outside. She lunged forward, her jacket slipping from her shoulders in a sodden heap. "Come on, boy," she murmured, voice barely audible over the deluge, her hands trembling as she draped the fabric over his shivering body. It was messy, an imperfect shield against the rain seeping through cracks, but real, a tangible act that bridged the chasm of her fear. Asher stiffened at first, his muscles coiling like wound springs, eyes flashing with the wariness of too many betrayals, but he didn't snap or retreat. In the dim hallway where the storm's fury muted to a persistent drum, Lucy knelt beside Asher, her impulsive decision, now a tether binding them. She rummaged in her backpack, pulling out a crumpled energy bar. Hardly dog food, but it was all she had, and broke it into pieces, offering one on her palm. "Here, take it," she whispered, her voice laced with the vulnerability of someone unused to giving without strings. Asher eyed the morsel, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent, his body still rigid from the chaos. Water pooled around them, mixing with mud from his paws, a messy testament to the rescue's imperfection. Dean paced nearby, radio crackling with static reports of flooding roads, his reluctance evident in every sharp glance. The storm had ebbed to a sullen drizzle by morning, leaving the house wrapped in a damp hush that amplified every creak and sigh. Lucy had fashioned a makeshift bed in the living room, from old blankets found in a closet, their musty scent a reminder of lives long vacated. Asher followed her there reluctantly, his paws leaving faint prints on the floorboards, but once inside he retreated to the farthest corner, curling into a tight ball with his back to the wall. His eyes, those deep wells of caution, tracked her movements without blinking, guarded unyielding like sentinels at a forbidden gate. No growl escaped him, but the tension in his frame spoke volumes, a silent barrier woven from years of betrayal. As afternoon light filtered through the grimy windows, casting elongated shadows that danced like hesitant partners, Lucy noticed the limp in Asher's gait, a subtle hitch she'd overlooked in the storm's chaos. Closer inspection from her respectful distance revealed a gash on his hind leg, crusted with dirt, and oozing faintly, a raw testament to some recent skirmish in the wild. Her heart clenched, mirroring the ache in her chest from Mia's memory, pain unrecognized until it demanded attention. She rummaged in her backpack for a first aid kit, the zipper's rasp breaking the silence like a confession. Asher's eyes narrowed, body tensing as she approached slowly, palms open in surrender. "It's okay," she whispered more to herself than him, her voice a threadbare lullaby. Kneeling a few feet away, she unwrapped a bandage, the sterile scent cutting through the room's mustiness. Asher didn't flee, but his lip curled slightly, a warning growl vibrating low in his throat, defensive yet laced with exhaustion. Lucy paused, letting him scent the air, her own breath shallow as memories flooded, bandaging Mia's scraped knee after a fall, the girl's tears turning to giggles under her care. The parallel stung. Both wounds, physical and emotional, begged for tending, without promise of thanks. She extended a hand with antiseptic wipe, not touching, but offering, and Asher watched his posture, a study in conflict, wary yet drawn by the quiet compassion. Evening settled over the house like a heavy quilt, the dim light from a cracked lamp casting flickering shadows that played across the walls like restless spirits. Lucy sat on the floor, sorting through debris from the storm, a shattered porcelain cup among the fragments, its floral pattern faded but evocative, stirring something deep within her. As she held a shard, the jagged edge pricking her skin, a memory surged. Mia at age 6, dropping their mother's favorite teacup during a pretend tea party, her small face crumpling in fear. Lucy had scooped her up, whispering, "It's just a cup, we'll fix it," gluing the pieces together in secret, their laughter sealing the cracks. The parallel hit like a wave. Here, in this forsaken place, broken things begged for mending. Asher, still in his corner, but less rigid now, watched her with tilted head. When she set the shard down, a soft clink echoing, he let out a single bark, sharp, unexpected, slicing through the quiet like a forgotten voice. Lucy startled, her eyes meeting his, and in that instant, flashbacks intertwined. For Asher, the sound was an echo of his past barking warnings in the night, as shadows stole the child, his cries unheeded, leaving him voiceless in grief. The gesture tied them, his bark a bridge, no longer recoiling, but pausing, accepting her presence as non-threatening. Lucy reached out tentatively, not touching but hovering, and Asher didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted closer by an inch, his tail giving a subtle twitch. The chill of the house began to thaw as Lucy kindled a fire in the old hearth, the crackling flames licking at the darkness like tentative tongues, casting a golden glow that softened the room's harsh edges. Wood popped and sparked, releasing a smoky aroma that mingled with the lingering scent of rain, creating a cocoon of warmth amid the decay. Asher, drawn by the heat, inched forward from his corner, his body uncoiling slightly as the fire's radiance reflected in his eyes, turning them from mournful pools to flickering embers. Lucy watched him, a small smile tugging at her lips, the first genuine one in days, as she tossed a stick into the blaze, the gesture playful, almost childlike. A soft chuckle escaped her when Asher tilted his head at the flames, his ears perking in curiosity, a far cry from his earlier rigidity. It was laughter born of relief light, an unexpected bubbling up like a spring after drought. "Look at you warming up," she murmured, extending a hand with a piece of bread from their meager supplies. Asher approached cautiously, sniffing the offering, before taking it gently from her fingers, his rough tongue brushing her skin in a sensation that sent a ripple of safety through her. No longer distant, he settled nearer the fire's warmth, mirroring the spark igniting between them, relaxation seeping in like sunlight through cracks. Night deepened around the old house, the fire's embers glowing like dying stars in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering light that softened the sharp edges of the room. Lucy sat with her back against the wall, legs stretched out, her notebook open on her lap, where she scribbled fragmented thoughts about the nursery's secrets, half-formed theories on the missing child intertwined with whispers of her own loss. The air hung heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a comforting veil that muted the world's intrusions. Asher lay across the room, his form a dark silhouette against the fading glow, his breathing steady but watchful eyes half closed in a semblance of rest. Dean had stepped out to his truck for more supplies, leaving them in a bubble of quiet intimacy, the kind that amplified every rustle, every sigh. Lucy's mind wandered, drifting to Mia's final moments, the hospital room's sterile chill, the beeps of machines like a dirge, her sister's hand limp in hers. If I could go back, she thought, I'd hold on tighter. A tear escaped, tracing a warm path down her cheek, and she wiped it away absently, not noticing how Asher's ears perked at the soft sound. He lifted his head, amber eyes locking onto her with an intensity that pierced the gloom. For a long moment, he simply stared, as if weighing the invisible threads connecting their pains. Then, unexpectedly, he rose slowly, deliberately, his paws padding softly across the creaky floorboards, each step a tentative bridge over the chasm of mistrust. Sleep came fitfully that night, the house groaning under the weight of its secrets as moonlight sliced through the curtains like silver blades. Lucy stirred on her makeshift bed dreams, weaving nightmares of Mia's accident. Twisted metal, rain-slicked screams morphing into visions of the cradle rocking empty, a baby's cry echoing from the walls. She awoke with a gasp, sweat beading on her brow, the room's chill seeping into her skin like an unwelcome embrace. Asher, who had settled near her feet, was already alert, his ears pricked forward, body rigid as a statue carved from tension. A faint scratching sounded from the walls like nails on wood, subtle but insistent, sending a shiver down Lucy's spine. He rose slowly, a low growl rumbling in his chest, directed not at her, but at the shadows pooling in the corners. His hackles raised posture, shifting to primal watchfulness, as if scenting a ghost from his tormented past. Lucy sat up, heart pounding, sensing the unseen presence that thickened the air, a whisper of wind through cracks perhaps, or something more sinister. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, her voice trembling, but Asher's focus remained on the nursery door, his growl deepening into a bark that shattered the quiet. Dean jolted awake nearby, rubbing his eyes, dismissing it with a gruff, "Just the wind, probably rats." Yet his voice held an edge, unease flickering in his gaze as memories of his uncle's cryptic letters surfaced, hints of hidden dealings tied to this very house. The signals built subtly Asher's instincts, a harbinger foreshadowing the storm brewing beyond the fragile peace they'd found. The scratching intensified, evolving from faint whispers in the walls to a deliberate rasp like fingers clawing for escape. Asher's growl escalated into a guttural snarl, his body a coiled spring as he positioned himself between Lucy and the nursery door, hackles raised like thorns in the moonlight. Lucy's pulse thundered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat echoing the panic rising in her chest. Not now, not when things are starting to heal. She reached for him instinctively, her hand trembling, but Asher's eyes flashed with a wild protectiveness rooted deep in his scarred soul. A shadow flickered under the door, and the air thickened with a familiar scent, musky cologne mixed with tobacco, a trigger that hurled Asher back to nights of violence, boots kicking chains, rattling the baby's cries, silenced by rough hands. Dean's face paled as he scrambled to his feet, recognition dawning like a storm cloud. "Uncle Ray," he whispered, voice cracking, but the name unleashed a flood. Asher lunged forward, barking ferociously, his jaws snapping at the air, as if battling phantoms, protective aggression surging like a maternal tide defending the cradle's ghost as he once had the child. Lucy recoiled. Her own emotions erupting shouts tore from her throat. "Get back! What's happening?" Panic clawed at her, flashbacks of Mia's accident blending with Asher's trauma, the screech of tires, the snap of bones, the helplessness that bound them. Dean shouted back, "Stay away from the door!" His voice raw with denial, but the floodgates burst. He withdrew to the corner, fists, clenched memories of his uncle's drunken rages, resurfacing the family secrets he'd buried under his badge. Asher's barks devolved into whimpers, his body shaking as he pressed against Lucy's leg, the explosion leaving them all exposed. She sank to her knees, tears streaming, whispering apologies to the air, to Mia, to Asher, to the fractured peace they'd glimpsed. Dean turned away, shoulders heaving, the room a cauldron of revealed abuse. Asher's scars throbbing anew, Lucy's guilt raw, Dean's complicity and silence shattering. Withdrawal followed the shouts, a heavy silence descending like fog, each retreating into their inner fortresses, the presence outside a harbinger of deeper wounds reopened. The door rattled violently, hinges groaning as if the house itself resisted the intrusion, and then it burst open with a splintering crack that echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Uncle Ray stumbled in, rain-slicked and wild-eyed, his weathered face, a map of shadows and stubble, the scent of whiskey clinging to him like a shroud. Asher's recognition was instantaneous, a primal snarl ripping from his throat, body launching forward in a blur of fur and fury, teeth bared in a protective rage that harked back to the night of the kidnapping. The dog's eyes locked on Ray memories, flashing the man's rough grasp on the bundle. Asher's desperate bites met with a clubbing blow, the cradle left empty as tires squealed into the night. Lucy screamed, "No!" her voice a fractured plea as she grabbed for Asher's collar, her fingers slipping on his wet fur, panic surging like bile in her throat. Dean froze for a heartbeat, then surged forward, his badge forgotten in the visceral standoff. "What the hell are you doing here?" he bellowed, voice thick with betrayal, his uncle's sudden appearance shattering the illusions he'd clung to, the man who'd taught him to fish, now revealed as the monster in family whispers. Ray's eyes darted to the cradle, visible through the doorway, greed flickering amid the desperation. "The compartment, it's mine, boy. Hand it over before I take it." His hand fumbled in his coat, pulling a rusted crowbar, the metal glinting ominously in the lamplight. Asher lunged again, a controlled snap, stopping short of contact, his growls vibrating the air, forcing Ray back a step in a tense dance of threat and retreat. The crowbar clattered to the floor, its echo fading into a suffocating silence that blanketed the room like fresh snow over a grave. Ray slumped against the wall, defeated, his confessions hanging in the air. Fragments of a kidnapping for ransom gone wrong, the baby sold to distant shadows, his greed a poison that had festered for decades. Dean released his grip, stepping back with heaving breaths, his knuckles-bloodied face, a mask of regret etched deep as canyons. "How could you?" he whispered, voice cracking the words, a lament for the uncle he'd idolized, now reduced to a broken man in handcuffs he'd reluctantly applied. Lucy stood frozen, Asher pressed against her leg. His growls subsided to panting whimpers, body trembling from the exertion of his protective fury. Physical separation followed the storm. Ray dragged to the hallway, bound and silent, his eyes avoiding the cradle's accusatory emptiness. Asher retreated to a corner, curling tight, his trust in the humans reaffirmed through the chaos, but needing space to mend. Lucy slid down the wall, knees to chest, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, regret flooding her for dragging them into this abyss, yet a quiet promise blooming in her chest. "We'll protect each other now." Dean paced briefly, then sat apart, staring at the floor, processing the betrayal that mirrored his own buried guilts. The room breathed with them. The danger passed like a receding tide, leaving debris of emotions to sift through. Asher's gaze met Lucy's across the divide, a silent vow of safety closing the chapter on his trauma with a fragile seal of mutual guardianship. Dawn crept in like a thief, pale light filtering through the curtains to reveal footprints muddied around the house's perimeter, fresh deliberate circling like a predator's prowl. Asher's ears twitched. First, his body snapping alert from his corner, a low whine escaping as he paced the room, nose to the ground, scenting the intruder who lingered beyond sight. Lucy stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes, the unease settling in her gut like lead. She glanced at Dean, who was already at the window, his face taut, hand on his holster. "Someone's been here," he muttered, voice low, the footprints a subtle harbinger that Ray's arrest had stirred a hornet's nest, perhaps accomplices from the old kidnapping ring, drawn by whispers of the cradle's hidden compartment. Tension coiled tighter as the day wore on. A snapped twig in the woods outside Asher's sudden stiffening and stare at the tree line, his hackles rising like warning flags. Lucy's heart raced, internal whispers amplifying the dread. "They're coming for the evidence for us." She clutched the small locket from the compartment beneath the cradle, unearthed in the night's chaos, a faded photo of the baby coordinates etched on the back, clues to a life stolen. Dean's radio crackled with static reports of suspicious vehicles nearby, but no backup in this remote hollow. Asher led them on a wary patrol, his instincts a compass, pausing at doors, growling at shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally, his body language a tapestry of watchfulness, tail-low eyes scanning a silent sentinel, echoing his past guardianship. The build reached a fever pitch. By dusk, a figure glimpsed in the fading light, darting between trees, the chase implicit in every rustle. Asher barked sharply, urging them deeper into the house, but the confrontation loomed inescapable. Dean's jaw set. "We can't run forever." As Lucy's mind raced with parallels to her sister's accident, imminent loss, the need to act. The air thrummed with anticipation signals converging into a storm, footprints leading to the back door. A note slipped under it, reading, "Give it up." Asher's unrelenting vigilance, the glue holding their fragile alliance together. The note's ink bled slightly from the rain, but its message burned clear. "Give it up or we take it all." Lucy's fingers trembled as she clutched the locket, its tiny photo of the stolen baby, a fragile key to justice, now a beacon for danger. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a trap, closing in the creaks of floorboards, now ominous footsteps echoing from outside, shadows lengthening as night fell. Asher's growls deepened, a constant rumble vibrating through the air. His body pressed low, senses attuned to the encroaching threat. Dean loaded his service weapon with a metallic click that punctuated the tension, his face grim. "They're here, 2, maybe 3. Ray's old partners, desperate to bury this." A window shattered downstairs, glass exploding inward like a burst vein, and shouts pierced the night. "Where's the proof?" Voices, rough and urgent, laced with the desperation of cornered animals. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, heavy boots shaking the foundation, and Asher positioned himself at the nursery door, teeth bared in a silent vow of defense. Lucy's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind flashing to Mia's final moments, the inevitability of loss crashing down again. Dean shoved her behind him, but a figure burst through, masked and armed with a makeshift club, swinging wildly. The confrontation erupted, Dean tackling one intruder, grunts and fists flying, while another advanced on Lucy, eyes fixed on the locket gleaming in her hand. Asher lunged, a blur of loyalty and fury, clamping onto the assailant's leg with a sickening crunch, the man's scream ripping through the chaos. Blood spattered the floorboards, metallic tang mixing with the scent of fear sweat as the threat turned visceral, knives drawn, threats snarled, "Hand it over or the dog dies first." Lucy's world narrowed to the precipice of imminent loss, her body collapsing against the wall in physical decline, heart pounding toward failure, the air thick with the promise of violence. Dean wrestled free, but a blow sent him reeling, blood trickling from his temple, the standoff teetering on the edge of death, the cradle's secret demanding a final, bloody toll. Time stretched thin in the nursery's chaos, the air electric with snarls and shouts, blood pooling like dark ink on the floor. Asher released his grip on the intruder's leg, circling back to Lucy's side, his body a shield of scarred muscle and unyielding loyalty eyes, locked on the threats with a primal fire. The masked man advanced again, knife glinting under the flickering bulb while Dean struggled to his feet, gun raised but hand unsteady from the blow, his choice hanging in the balance: protect the evidence, the dog, or Lucy, whose wide eyes mirrored the terror of her past losses. I can't lose them too. Lucy's mind raced, the locket burning in her palm like a talisman, urging action amid the paralysis. In that suspended heartbeat, Lucy made her decision irreversible, born of the bond forged in shadows. She hurled the locket toward the cradle, a diversion that drew the assailant's gaze, then lunged forward, grabbing Asher's collar to pull him from harm's path as the man swung wildly. "No!" she cried, her voice a raw command, transforming fear into fierce protection, shielding the dog who'd chosen her, repaying his trust with her own vulnerability. Asher twisted, not retreating, but pivoting to defend her, his bark a thunderous declaration, teeth snapping at the air inches from the intruder's arm. Dean, inspired by their unity, fired a warning shot into the ceiling plaster, raining like confetti from a fractured sky, his voice booming, "Stand down, it's over." The intruders hesitated, the tide turning as sirens wailed in the distance. Backup summoned earlier, now a lifeline. Lucy's action resolved the tension. The locket skittered under the cradle, safe in its hidden compartment, while Asher leaned into her, his warmth a anchor. Dean subdued the men cuffs, clicking like final punctuation, his choice to protect them all sealing the emotional Ark family, redefined not by blood, but by shared scars and sacrifices. The room exhaled danger, ebbing into resolution, the bond unbreakable in the aftermath of choice. The sirens faded into a distant wail as the ambulance doors closed, sealing Lucy, Dean, and Asher in a sterile cocoon of beeps and fluorescent hum. Paramedics worked methodically, bandaging Dean's split temple with gauze that bloomed red at the edges, their movements deliberate, unhurried, like stitching a tear in the fabric of night. Lucy sat on the bench, her hand resting lightly on Asher's flank, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, slow, labored from the fray, his fur matted with dried blood, not entirely his own. The dog's eyes, half-lidded, stared at the floor, reflecting the emotional void that settled over them all. The adrenaline's crash left a hollow echo where victory tasted like ash. In the hospital waiting room, hours later, the air thick with antiseptic and quiet murmurs, they decompressed in fragments. Dean slouched in a plastic chair, staring at his hands, the cuffs from the intruders now replaced by paperwork's invisible chains. Reports of the arrest, the locket's secrets unfolding to authorities. Lucy paced softly, her steps measured, pausing to stroke Asher's ears when he whined faintly, the vet's assurance of minor wounds doing little to fill the void. No words passed easily. Sentences trailed off into sighs, long pauses, heavy with the weight of survival. The cradle's shadow lingered, a faint specter in their minds, but the crisis's end brought a fragile return to safety, bodies mending, spirits adrift in the quiet aftermath. Days blurred into a steady rhythm. Back at Lucy's apartment, the city sounds a muffled backdrop to their gradual mending. Asher followed her from room to room, his steps tentative at first, pause, clicking softly on the hardwood like a heartbeat finding its pace. In the kitchen, Lucy prepared simple meals, kibble for him, soup for her and Dean, who lingered more often now, his presence a quiet fixture. Asher ate slowly, his muzzle dipping into the bowl, but always with a glance upward, eyes meeting Lucy's in fleeting contacts that spoke volumes, gratitude woven with caution, a mirror to her own hesitant smiles. The bond deepened through these repetitions, his tail thumping faintly when she entered the room, her hand brushing his head in passing, a gesture small yet profound. Dean joined the weave, his gruff edges softening as he sat on the floor, offering treats from his palm. Asher approached warily, sniffing before accepting the act, a bridge over past divides. Dean's eyes would mist, then reflecting on his uncle's fall, the family's fracture healing in these moments of shared vulnerability. Lucy and Asher mirrored each other. She journaled her grief for Mia, tears falling as Asher lay close, his warmth a silent companion. He in turn allowed her to clean his wounds, flinching less each time, his trust blooming like dawn light. Sensory details anchored them, the scent of fresh bandages, the warmth of fur under fingers, the steady tempo of breaths sinking in quiet evenings. Over time, the healing intertwined Asher's calm gaze, drawing Lucy from her void, her gentle touches easing his scars. Dean's stories filling the spaces between, forging a tapestry of recovery from the threads of their broken pasts. Weeks later, under a sky streaked with the soft hues of dawn, Lucy stood at the threshold of the abandoned house one final time, the air crisp with autumn's farewell. Asher sat beside her, his silver muzzle lifted to the breeze, scars faded under new fur that gleamed in the light. Dean lingered a step behind, keys in hand, his presence a steady anchor. "Asher," Lucy called softly, the name a gentle summons, and he turned, eyes meeting hers with a clarity unclouded by fear, his head tilting in recognition. Then, unbidden, he rose and pressed his flank against her leg, a warm weight that sealed their bond, his breath sinking with hers in rhythmic harmony. They walked together from the porch steps, unhurried, side by side down the overgrown path. Asher's paws patting softly, Lucy's hand brushing his back in fleeting touches, Dean falling in stride. The motion was intimate, a dance of eyes and breaths, the house receding like a shed skin. In that quiet procession, fear dissolved, replaced by an emotional release, a rebirth whispered in the rustle of leaves, the trio emerging into light as a family forged from shadows.